Imagine being locked in a steel box for 3 years while distant metal creaks against the dark ocean. No escape, no privacy, and as I found out as a Marine, you aren't the only thing trapped. For Navy sailors, a permanent assignment to a ship can stretch for 3 long, grueling years of service. Life aboard an Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer like the USS Winston Churchill, a study in constant confinement. Like being buried alive in a luxury hotel that never stops moving, the psychological toll immense. How long could you stay truly sane in a floating prison where every wall is made of steel? These stories of the deep often surface in the mysterious collection known as Tales from the Gridsquare. While patrolling the Gulf of Aden for Somali smugglers, the isolation of the ocean starts to feel heavy. Even with allies like the HMCS Athabaskan nearby, the silence of the open water can be absolutely deafening. Deep below the waterline, hidden areas like auxiliary room to hold a different kind of oppressive atmosphere. Sailors often whisper about Cell Block 81, a place where the shadows seem to have their own weight. The constant vibration of the hull and the smell of fuel create a sensory experience that never ends. You begin to hear things in the pipes, rhythms that don't match the steady pulse of the engines. Privacy becomes a distant memory when you live and breathe inches away from hundreds of other souls. What happens when the walls start talking back to you in the middle of a long night watch? The ship becomes more than just a vessel. It feels like a living, breathing entity that watches you. I have seen many good men lose themselves to the crushing claustrophobia of the lower deck's dark corners. Every creak of the metal and groan of the ship tells a story of long, lonely years at sea. But on one specific ship, the confinement wasn't just psychological, it was personal and terrifyingly real. Down in the belly of the steel beast, we learned that some things are meant to stay hidden. Transitioning from the hidden depths, we find the USS Winston Churchill, a massive Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer. Within her gray walls, sailors face a reality that many outsiders could never truly understand. Navy life often demands long deployments, but some assignments stretch far beyond a standard tour. Navy sailors can be permanently assigned to ships for as long as 3 full years. For 3 long years, your entire world is reduced to the rhythmic humming of heavy machinery. This intense period of isolation begins to warp the mind in strange and unexpected ways. Every creak of the hull feels like a whisper, and every shadow seems to follow you. Eric and his weary shipmates found themselves trapped in this metallic cycle day after day. To cope with the crushing confinement, the crew developed their own grim sense of humor. They didn't just see the ship as a workplace. They saw it as something far more restrictive. Soon, a dark nickname began to circulate among the men living deep within the ship's gut. Eric and his shipmates referred to the USS Winston Churchill as Cell Block 81. The name Cell Block 81 wasn't just a joke. It was a psychological survival mechanism. Labeling the ship a prison helped them process the absolute lack of freedom they felt. In the middle of the ocean, there is nowhere to run and no place to hide. Isolation like this breeds a specific kind of tension that settles deep within your bones. You start to notice things in the periphery, small anomalies that shouldn't be there at all. The mind plays tricks when you are confined to steel corridors for months on end. Tales from the Gridsquare often records how this mental strain leads to strange encounters. On the Churchill, the line between reality and the supernatural began to blur for everyone. Every sailor has a breaking point where the mechanical becomes something much more sinister. For those on Cell Block 81, the walls were starting to feel like they were closing. It was more than just being tired. It was a heavy, lingering sense of being watched. They were sailors on a modern destroyer, yet they felt like inmates in a floating fortress. The atmosphere inside the hull grew increasingly thick with a sense of dread and anticipation. While patrolling the Gulf of Aden, the crew's isolation was punctuated by encounters with Somali smugglers. Even with allies like the HMCS Athabaskan nearby, the feeling of total separation remained absolute. Strange reports began to surface from the most isolated parts of the massive vessel. One area in particular seemed to be the focal point for these unsettling maritime experiences. Deep within the ship lies Auxiliary Room 2, a place where the shadows feel much darker. This environment created a perfect storm for the hauntings that would soon plague the crew. In 2011, a sailor named Eric stepped onto the deck of the USS Winston Churchill. He arrived in Norfolk, Virginia, expecting a standard tour of duty aboard the powerful destroyer. The USS Winston Churchill, an Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer, built for high-stakes maritime warfare. With the designation DDG-81 painted on its hull, the ship looks like a floating fortress. Between 2011 and 2012, Eric began to realize this assignment was unlike any other he experienced. The crew didn't just call it a ship. They whispered a much darker name in secret. They referred to their own home as Cell Block 81, a title that hinted at something sinister. This haunting account was later documented by the researchers at Tales from the Gridsquare. Eric wondered why the men serving aboard would compare a modern warship to a prison cell. The Winston Churchill was less of a ship and more of a maze made of missiles. Stationed in Norfolk, the vessel appeared majestic to outsiders, but the interior told a different story. Eric worked as a damage control petty officer, a role that took him into the ship's depths. He spent his days and nights maintaining the complex systems that kept the steel giant alive. As he walked the lonely passageways, the nickname Cell Block 81 began to feel hauntingly accurate. The tight corridors and heavy hatches created a sense of isolation that weighed on every sailor. What did the crew know about this Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer that the brass did not? For Eric, the mystery of the Churchill was only beginning to reveal its cold, metal teeth. The year 2011 marked the start of a journey into the darkest corners of naval history. Every turn in the ventilation shafts or engine rooms felt like stepping deeper into a trap. Cell Block 81 was about to become the stage for a series of terrifying paranormal events. Eric's job as a damage control petty officer was about to take him into the ship's darkest corners. But this isn't just one man's ghost story, whispered in the dark corridors of a ship. Eric isn't alone, because thousands of others share these same chilling and unexplained military experiences. Meet Nick Orton, a man who has become the librarian of the military's most classified nightmares. Nick is an active duty soldier currently serving his country within the ranks of the U.S. Army. While in uniform, he began documenting the strange things soldiers see when the sun goes down. This dedicated research led him to author a compelling book titled Tales from the Gridsquare. Within Volume 1 of this collection, he has meticulously compiled 240 short stories. These accounts come from service members stationed at various installations across the entire globe. Is it really possible for thousands of soldiers to all share the same terrifying hallucination? Nick uses these records to validate the hauntings as a much broader and more consistent phenomenon. The details in these reports are eerily similar, regardless of where the soldiers are stationed. Where do these stories actually go when the uniform finally comes off and service ends? For many, Nick is the only person willing to listen to their most haunting professional secrets. The title Tales from the Gridsquare refers to the coordinate system used by soldiers everywhere. Volume 1 serves as a chilling gateway into a world of military mystery few ever see. Being a soldier himself gives Nick a unique perspective on the trauma of the unknown. From desert outposts to deep-sea vessels, the reports kept flooding in from every possible environment. He soon realized the sheer number of accounts suggested our military bases are quite crowded. These bases might be more populated by spirits than any official roster would ever suggest. His work provides a necessary voice for those who fear ridicule for what they saw. Many of these stories mention a recurring presence that seems to follow the troops home. Nick's research points to a specific kind of shadow that specifically haunts the deep engineering decks. Going back to Eric on the Winston Churchill, his daily life revolved around the ship's massive steel skeleton. As a damage control petty officer, his duty was keeping this Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer in fighting shape. Maintenance on such a complex machine meant Eric had access to every hidden corner of the vessel. He moved through the narrow passageways, a silent witness to the inner workings of Cell Block 81. Most spaces felt routine, but one specific area always sparked hushed whispers among the weary crew. Have you ever walked into a room and known, instantly, you were not welcome? Deep in the gut of the Churchill lies Auxiliary Room 2, a vital engineering space for maintenance. To the engineers, it was more than just a room. It was the dark basement of the ship. While it served a functional purpose, many crew members went to great lengths just to avoid it. Why would a dedicated petty officer fear a simple maintenance space tucked deep within the engineering deck? Eric soon discovered that Auxiliary Room 2 carried an unsettling reputation that defied all logical explanation. The air in this engineering space didn't just feel stagnant, it felt heavy with an unseen weight. Stepping inside meant leaving the relative comfort of the main decks for a realm of shadows. The constant thrum of the Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer seemed to change its pitch within these walls. Thick smells of fuel and hot metal usually filled the air, as one would expect in engineering. But in Auxiliary Room 2, those familiar scents were often interrupted by sudden, impossible patches of cold. Eric felt the temperature plummet even when the ship's engines were working at their highest capacity. He noticed how his fellow sailors would finish their tasks with frantic speed and then quickly depart. No one wanted to be the last person left alone with the machinery in that particular space. For Eric, the damage control petty officer, the room became a source of constant, nagging dread. Tales from the Gridsquare often describe such places where the environment feels strangely hostile. It was as if the ship itself held a memory that preferred to remain undisturbed in the dark. Every maintenance task performed there felt like an intrusion into a territory that no longer belonged to men. Despite his training, Eric couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching him from the complex pipework. Because in Auxiliary Room 2, the atmosphere didn't just feel heavy, it felt targeted toward whoever entered. What if a haunting could choose its prey and change its nature based on who entered? Reports regarding Auxiliary Room 2 started coming in, but the stories simply did not match up. On the USS Winston Churchill, the steel walls seemed to hold a very specific kind of awareness. It was not just a generic sense of dread that filled the air of that machinery space. Instead, the presence in Room 2 appeared to size up every sailor who dared to step inside. Like a predator searching for a unique weakness, the entity shifted its tactics for every visitor. When the female sailors entered the room, the atmosphere took on a chilling, voyeuristic quality. Several women reported a persistent feeling that unseen eyes were following their every move. They described the sensation of being watched from the shadows, even when they were completely alone. The air would grow heavy with an intrusive gaze that never seemed to blink or waver. Is there a logic to this fear, or is the room reacting to our own vulnerabilities? However, for the men serving on the Winston Churchill, the experience in Room 2 was far worse. Male colleagues encountered something much more aggressive than just a silent observer in the dark. They often felt as though they were under imminent attack the moment they crossed the threshold. It was the paralyzing sensation of a hidden threat coiled and ready to strike at any second. This was not just being watched, it was being hunted by something that wanted to inflict harm. Why would the presence choose to watch the women, but actively threaten the men with violence? This gendered manifestation turned Auxiliary Room 2 into one of the ship's most debated mysteries. Tales from the Gridsquare began to fill with these conflicting yet equally terrifying accounts. Sailors started comparing notes, realizing the haunting had a terrifyingly intelligent way of operating. The Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer held many secrets, but this targeted fear was the most unsettling. But as the dread intensified, the crew began to ask, why this specific room? The reason for the terror wasn't ghosts in the machines, but what sat directly above Eric's head. To understand the fear, Eric began studying the complex internal layout of the Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer. He traced the steel corridors until his fingers rested on the blueprints for Auxiliary Room 2. Then, the chilling connection between the ship's history and the hauntings finally became undeniably clear. Every Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer, a marvel of engineering. Yet some secrets remain hidden in steel. Looking closely at the deck plans, Eric realized that another compartment sat just inches above his workspace. This was the ship's freezer, a massive cold storage unit designed for keeping vital supplies fresh. However, during that tragic mission in the Gulf of Aden, the freezer served a much darker purpose. Following the capsizing of the skiff used by Somali smugglers, 13 drowned bodies were recovered. These deceased refugees were brought aboard the USS Winston Churchill to be treated with solemn dignity. With no formal morgue on board, the crew had to find a cold place for the remains. The bodies of these unfortunate souls were stored inside the ship's freezer for the journey home. This cold steel vault was located directly above the very room where Eric felt the most dread. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing 13 bodies were resting just one thin metal deck above you. The physical layout of the ship had turned a simple maintenance room into a place of tragedy. It was like living in a house where the attic had been turned into a temporary graveyard. How much energy is left behind when a body is stored in cold steel for days? The chilling link between the hauntings and the rescue tragedy was now undeniable and deeply disturbing. Eric couldn't help but wonder if the spirits were reaching through the floor to find comfort. Is it a coincidence that the activity centered exactly beneath where the refugees were placed? The ship's freezer became a place for food, and occasionally, a makeshift morgue for the lost. To understand the horror of Cell Block 81, we must look at the ship's cold steel design. The USS Winston Churchill, a powerful Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, hides a grim secret within its layout. Deep inside this floating fortress, the galley's food storage serves a dual and darker purpose during crises. In the vast expanse of the Gulf of Aden, tragedy often strikes without warning for those at sea. Somali smugglers frequently abandon desperate refugees, leaving them to the mercy of the unforgiving ocean waves. When the Winston Churchill responds to these mass casualty events, the crew faces a logistical nightmare. With no dedicated morgue on board, the ship's freezer becomes the only place to store the deceased. It is a chilling reality where the preservation of food meets the grim duty of honoring the lost. This specific arrangement is a standard feature across the entire Burke-class destroyer fleet. For the sailors on board, the proximity between life and death is measured in mere inches of steel. The physical layout of these ships creates an unsettling connection between the kitchen and the engineering decks. On the Winston Churchill, the massive ship's freezer sits directly above the infamous auxiliary room 2. While sailors worked on the machines below, the weight of the fallen rested just above their heads. Imagine the psychological toll of knowing exactly what lies behind the heavy, frosted doors of that freezer. Tales from the Gridsquare often highlights these moments where military precision meets the truly macabre. The cold from the storage unit bleeds through the deck plates, cooling the air in the room below. It wasn't just the machinery hum that filled the space, but the heavy silence of the temporary morgue. Even the most seasoned sailors find it difficult to ignore the presence of the dead so close by. This proximity is what transformed Auxiliary Room 2 into a place of whispered legends and icy dread. Operations alongside vessels like the HMCS Athabaskan required the crew to be ready for any maritime disaster. Every time the freezer doors opened, a bit of that lingering sorrow seemed to seep into the hallways. This logistical necessity created a permanent stain on the atmosphere of the ship's lower engineering levels. We must realize that the haunting of Cell Block 81 began with these very real, physical tragedies. The transition from a simple food locker to a morgue changed the energy of the entire deck. As the cold metal creaked, the line between the living and the dead became terrifyingly thin. It all came to a head during a port stay for the USS Winston Churchill in 2011. The ship was docked when a sudden, total blackout plunged the entire vessel into oppressive, heavy darkness. Every light went out as the main breaker completely cut power across the massive Arleigh Burke destroyer. In the silence that followed, Eric found himself navigating the pitch-black corridors toward the dreaded Auxiliary Room 2. The absence of the usual hum made the ship feel like a dead, hollow animal waiting in port. He stepped into the engineering compartment, his flashlight cutting a lonely beam through the thick, stagnant air. This was the belly of the beast, where the metal skin of the ship usually vibrated with life. But without electricity, the machine should have been nothing more than silent, cold lumps of heavy steel. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness, a low, grinding noise that shouldn't have been physically possible. It was the unmistakable mechanical groan of machinery cranking to life without a single spark of electricity. The sound was like the ship itself trying to breathe without lungs in the out dead of night. Eric froze, his heart hammering against his ribs as he listened to the impossible rhythm of the gears. How can a machine crank and turn when there is absolutely no power flowing through the system? The darkness seemed to press closer as the rhythmic metal-on-metal scraping grew louder and more frantic. It felt as if something unseen was manually forcing the heavy auxiliary equipment to cycle against its will. Then, the mechanical grinding was eclipsed by a sound that chilled Eric to his very core. Out of the shadows, a loud, distorted voice began to scream with a terrifying and primal intensity. The voice wasn't just loud, it was a command that echoed off the cold walls of the compartment. "Get out!" the entity shrieked, the words tearing through the silence like a jagged blade of sound. The scream repeated over and over, vibrating through the metal deck plates and into Eric's very bones. Panic surged through him as he realized he was definitely not alone in the blackness of Room 2. There was no logical explanation for who was screaming or why the machines were moving on their own. The atmospheric pressure in the room seemed to drop, leaving him gasping for air in the haunted silence. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to flee before the darkness swallowed him whole. He didn't need to be told twice. He turned and scrambled out of that metal tomb immediately. If you talk to enough sailors, the Churchill's terrifying story begins to sound hauntingly familiar. But this our Labert-class destroyer isn't the only hole where the metal seems to breathe. Across the entire fleet, from the Gulf of Aden to local ports, strange events plague the night. Tales from the Gridsquare are filled with reports of mysterious figures lurking in the shadows. On every ship, the P-way on the second deck acts like a massive, echoing steel artery. This long passageway runs throughout the vessel, connecting every cold corner of the ship's interior. At 0000 hours, when the world is silent, this artery often feels like something is clogging it. Why do these bone-chilling encounters always seem to happen during the deepest part of the night? Two sailors were walking this empty corridor when they felt a sudden shift in the heavy air. Without warning, a massive steel hatch swung open right in front of their very eyes. There was no mechanical failure and no reason for the heavy latch to simply give way. Was it just the wind? Or was a spectral hand guiding the metal on its hinges? They stood frozen in the dim light, staring into the dark void that the hatch revealed. Similar reports describe shadowy figures watching from the far ends of these long, metallic tunnels. These silent observers vanish the moment a flashlight beam cuts through the oppressive, heavy darkness. Whether it's Somali smugglers or restless spirits, something is clearly stalking the second deck P-ways. Even on the HMCS Athabaskan, these mysterious movements suggest the hauntings aren't limited to American ships. The steel doesn't just hold the crew, it seems to trap the echoes of the past. Every creak and groan of the hull tells a story that many sailors are afraid to hear. And sometimes, these chilling tales of the deep begin to cross international borders and different fleets. Even our allies have stories that defy physics, echoing through the cold northern waters of Canada. North of the border, the Canadian Navy has its own legends of ships that refuse to stay empty. These chilling accounts, often found in tales from the Gridsquare, come from experts monitoring the airwaves. Canadian Navy air controllers rely on the HF radio band to communicate across vast, desolate stretches of ocean. The long-range HF band acts like a psychic medium, catching signals from thousands of miles away at night. But sometimes, these high-frequency channels pick up otherworldly voices that shouldn't exist in our modern world. Imagine sitting in a quiet control room and hearing a desperate transmission crackling from a long-lost era. These phantom voices whisper through the static, speaking in codes and languages forgotten by time. Can a radio pick up a voice from the past? Or is the ocean itself playing tricks? One particular vessel stands out in these northern hauntings, a legendary destroyer known as the HMCS Athabaskan. The HMCS Athabaskan was a proud ship that served the Canadian fleet with distinction for many long years. Eventually, the time came for the steel giant to be decommissioned and pulled from active service. Even as a hollow shell, the Athabaskan seemed to cling to the heavy memories of its former life. Sailors tasked with guarding the silent vessel began reporting encounters that defied any logical or physical explanation. They spoke of a mysterious figure who roamed the darkened, freezing corridors of the decommissioned destroyer. This figure was described as an old sailor, dressed in a vintage uniform from a bygone generation. He would appear suddenly in the dim light, holding a wooden pipe between his weathered, spectral teeth. The faint, sweet smell of tobacco smoke would fill the air before he vanished into thin air. Guards would turn a corner to confront the intruder, only to find an empty, silent steel hallway. These sightings weren't just fleeting shadows, but vivid interactions that left seasoned sailors questioning their own sanity. What happens to a ship's soul once the engines stop and the crew finally walks away forever? For those who walked the decks of the Athabaskan, the answer was standing right before their eyes. The decommissioned destroyer became a floating tomb for a spirit that simply refused to go ashore. Even in death, the old sailor remained at his post, haunting the ship he once called home. A ghost smoking a pipe on a dead ship is a classic image that haunted those air controllers. To understand the ghost, you have to understand the tragedy that occurred in the deep ocean. This wasn't just a legend, but a real-life mission that went horribly wrong in the Gulf of Aden. We have to go back to September 2010, when the sun beat down on the shimmering waves. The USS Winston Churchill, a massive Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer, was patrolling these dangerous, blue waters. Nearby, a Korean merchant ship spotted something small and struggling against the vast horizon of the sea. It was a tiny refugee skiff, overloaded and drifting aimlessly under the unforgiving heat of the sun. There were 85 people crammed onto that small vessel, hoping for a chance at a new life. The group consisted of 10 Somali refugees and 75 others who had fled from Ethiopia. These people were likely abandoned by Somali smugglers, leaving them to face the ocean's elements alone. How do you process a tragedy of this magnitude when it happens right on your watch? The Winston Churchill quickly responded to the merchant ship's call, moving in to provide much-needed assistance. Sailors deployed a rigid hull inflatable craft, carrying fresh water and food to the starving refugees. As the American boat approached, the skiff became a scale where a single ship tipped into disaster. Panic likely set in as the refugees rushed toward the side, desperate for their life-saving supplies. In a terrifying instant, the sudden shift in weight caused the fragile skiff to capsize completely. 85 souls were suddenly thrown into the dark water, struggling to stay afloat in the chaos. Can a massive steel ship like the Winston Churchill truly absorb the weight of 85 souls? The American crew jumped into action, pulling frantic survivors from the water as quickly as possible. They managed to rescue 64 survivors, bringing them onto the deck of the powerful destroyer. Despite their best efforts, 8 refugees were lost to the sea and were officially presumed missing. The tragedy left a permanent scar on the crew and the very steel of the Winston Churchill. This historical deep dive reveals why the ship's lower decks feel so heavy with lingering sorrow. The freezer connection mentioned earlier suddenly takes on a much darker and more literal meaning today. Tales from the Gridsquare often recount the heavy atmosphere that still lingers in Auxiliary Room 2. 64 people were saved, but 13 were not, and the ship never forgot their presence. The USS Winston Churchill cut through the dark waters of the Gulf of Aden on a clear night. Lookouts spotted a small, overcrowded skiff bobbing dangerously in the swells of the open ocean. On board that tiny vessel, 85 souls were packed together, hoping for a chance at a better life. This desperate group included 75 Ethiopian refugees and 10 Somali companions seeking a dangerous crossing. Seeing the distress of the vessel, the massive Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer slowed its powerful engines. The crew of the Winston Churchill immediately prepared to render aid to the stranded travelers. Sailors moved with practiced precision to deploy a rigid hull inflatable craft into the churning water. This small rescue boat carried essential supplies of fresh water and food for the starving refugees. As the inflatable craft approached the skiff, hope and desperation filled the air in equal measure. The refugees, seeing the American sailors approaching, surged toward the side of their unstable wooden boat. In an instant, the precarious balance of the overcrowded skiff was lost to the weight of panic. A sudden, violent shift in weight caused the fragile vessel to tilt sharply toward the dark sea. Before the sailors could intervene, the entire skiff capsized, throwing everyone into the deep, cold water. Screams pierced the night as 85 people struggled against the unforgiving pull of the ocean. The crew of the Winston Churchill worked frantically to pull survivors from the chaos of the waves. Sailors reached into the dark, grasping for hands as they fought to save every life they could. By the end of the harrowing night, 64 survivors were pulled safely onto the American destroyer. While 64 lived to tell the tale, 13 others were confirmed lost to the silent depths. Those 13 lost souls would become the tragic foundation for the hauntings inside Cell Block 81. The heavy silence that followed that night still echoes through the steel corridors of the Churchill today. Even now, tales from the Gridsquare suggest that those lost in the Gulf never truly left. The tragedy remains etched into the ship's history, a dark weight beneath the feet of every sailor. It is a small world in the military, but it is certainly a strange one at night. As a Marine, I have learned that these stories are more than just simple campfire tales. We carry these unexplained moments like heavy gear, shared only with those who truly understand them. Whether it is the Churchill or the Gridsquare, these chilling encounters bond us together forever. They represent the unclassified history of the military that you will never find in official manuals. Think about the sailor named Eric and his harrowing journey aboard the USS Winston Churchill. His time on that Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer left internal scars that logic cannot explain away. From Auxiliary Room 2 to the silence of Cell Block 81, the terror felt entirely real. Why do we keep telling these stories to every new recruit who joins our ranks today? Are we bonding over a shared fear? Or are we collectively acknowledging a hidden, darker truth? These accounts serve as the modern campfires for service members stationed in lonely, dark places. Author Nick Orton captured this essence perfectly in his book, Tales from the Gridsquare. He documented the whispers from the Gulf of Aden and the echoes of the Phantom Fleet. Each story in Volume 1 serves as a testament to the strange things we actually see. You eventually realize that your own brush with the paranormal is part of a larger pattern. Every service member has that one story they hesitate to tell until the lights go dim. We find common ground in the unexplained, connecting across different branches and distant duty stations. These narratives act as a bridge between the rational world and the heavy darkness of service. Perhaps the ghost of Cell Block 81 is just one piece of a global military mystery. We share these stories not just to scare each other, but to remember our past together. Even in the middle of a vast ocean, these shared secrets keep the crushing isolation away. The strange coincidences between our reports suggest something far more tangible than simple maritime myths. For every Marine or sailor, these hauntings are a badge of honor in the vast unknown. We keep talking, keeping the history alive one terrifying, whispered sentence at a time. Before you head out to your next watch, we have one final request for you today. So, what is your story? Or have you ever heard a scream during a shipboard blackout? Have you ever seen a shadow creeping through the peeway of a silent and sleeping ship? We have explored the dark secrets hidden within the steel of the USS Winston Churchill today. The massive walls of that Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer still hold many echoes of the unknown, from the depths of Auxiliary Room 2 to the chilling legends found in Cell Block 81. These accounts survive only because service members like you choose to step forward and speak up. We must remember the tragedy in the Gulf of Aden and the restless souls lost there. Even the encounters with Somali smugglers take on a terrifying supernatural weight in the dead night. Our allies on the HMCS Athabaskan have their own terrifying tales that deserve to be heard. To keep these histories alive, we must continue to support our dedicated and brave military authors. They are the ones documenting the strange events that official military logbooks often choose to ignore. You can find more incredible accounts by supporting the community at Tales from the Gridsquare. The comments section is our new Gridsquare, where we gather to exchange our darkest memories. Have you checked the freezer lately? Or did you feel a sudden, unexplained chill nearby recently? Who is watching you from the darkness when you think you are completely alone on deck? We are looking for veterans to share their authentic experiences with the paranormal and the unexplained. Your personal account could be the next vital piece of the puzzle in this haunting legacy. Every story shared helps strengthen the unclassified bond that connects us across the dark, deep seas. Don't let these mysteries fade into the shadows of history without being properly recorded and remembered. We are building a library of nightmares that honors the service of those who saw it. Stay vigilant, keep your eyes scanning the dark, and I will see you in the next one.